Good morning, Chattanooga. Welcome to Legal Bytes. This is Jim McCoon, your host, and today co-hosting with me is Clay Whitaker. How you doing, Clay?
They're good, Jim.
Yeah. I guess this is a welcome back, Jim, because
Welcome back, Jim.
I went out of town, as a lot of families did, for the 4th of July week. Had a good time in Florida with my wife and children. But it's good to be back, and I appreciate you handling the show last Wednesday. And from what I could hear of it and what I've heard about it, y'all started talking about some of the zoning and Airbnb issues.
Yeah, Jim, we didn't really get to finish that. So one of the things I thought we'd do today is make sure that we kind of finished up that topic. We sort of generally introduced it last time, got a few calls as a result of something I think that most of Chattanooga has some interest in, either that as an adjacent landowner or someone who's interested in doing Airbnb rentals.
Right. And I guess just to recap, where are we right now with what the city's done with Airbnb?
Well, my understanding is that there's a proposal, and the idea is, like it is with a lot of zoning, is that there's going to be a special permit and a zoning, an area that's designated as for that special use in the zoning code. What we'd understood, and we sort of mentioned last time, is that the ridge appears to be a geographical indicator that's the cutoff for the area where it's currently under consideration for the special use permit to allow the Airbnb to exist here in our zoning code. So planning is kind of, one of those things we talked a little bit last time, is that there's two sort of elements that we need to look at anytime you're talking about zoning. And one is the planning. So planners use the enabling statute that's in Tennessee to, as their sort of statutory authority to set up the overall comprehensive zoning plan, and particularly address issues that become current or acute. In this particular instance, it's a current topic. Airbnb, one of those things that has arisen as a result of the cultural changes and technology that's now coming to use with regards to rental. And so the planners are trying to address that, and trying to address a local issue that there's a lot of communities across the country are now sort of dealing with. And the way that they selected doing it is to develop a special use permit.
Well, they did similar, had to make adjustments when we went from taxi cabs to Uber drivers. So
That's true.
They did the same thing here locally because they wanted to make sure that there was some way to verify Uber drivers.
That's right. I think that's something that we ought to be proud of and willing to participate in. These kinds of things are exactly where the community and government come together. Government's not a separate entity. It is our government. It's our decision making. It's the things that we believe are important. We get to participate in it, and that's the kind of thing, particularly whether you mentioned Uber or Lyft, and the same thing with Airbnb and other rental, short-term rental agreements. That those are the kinds of things that the citizenry gets to participate in, and that's what government's all about.
I agree with you completely. But let's talk about this. So many people, and most of us are some type of a property owner, say it's my property. I have a right to do with it as I want to. And yet these rules and regulations and zoning issues seem to be affecting that. What's the balance?
Well, that's a tough thing. It depends, because we discussed last time, and I think these sort of introductory comments are appropriate. For instance, in Chattanooga, we have a chicken plant. We'll just use the chicken plant analogy. We started talking about that last time. Either the chicken plant or other industrial uses are the typical underlying reasons why zoning became important in the first place. Large cities started developing residential areas, and they many times encroached upon what had previously been an area that was strictly reserved for commercial use.
Industrial.
And so,
even heavier than commercial, right?
Yeah, and industrial. And so as a result of that, people were exposed to either loud noises, noxious fumes, other potential health hazards. As a result of those health hazards becoming the concern of government, the regulations had to develop in terms of zoning. So the original testing of zoning regulations all related to what can the government do to control or to regulate the use of a private property owner's piece of property. And that's why we've come into this overall comprehensive zoning. So in Tennessee, we started back in the early 1920s with our own sort of zoning laws. That's developed over time. And it's essentially, when you ask what can we do, there are a number of ways that the governmental entities can regulate a particular property owner's use, either when they propose a new use or one that has been grandfathered in. So you typically, what happens, let's say it's an old use, like the chicken plant, been around a long time, neighborhoods develop around it, the area changes. The chicken plant may not be allowed to add on or to change its use. So we typically say that use has become non-conforming to the area where the zoning regulation is currently in effect. A proper zone, the planners try to look at what the remaining area surrounding that particular use is, and then to regulate it. And so that usually requires some limitation on future development. Now, if that changes, let's say that someone decides we're going to develop a property that previously had not been involved in that kind of use, or one that's unusual or contrary to the neighborhood.
Well, I mean, a good example of that is all the redevelopment of old brownfield development that's happening, where we've got former industrial commercial sites that may have had some contamination. They're shut down now, and we're redeveloping those mills and those facilities. And a lot of times what we want to do is we take that old I zone, that industrial zone, and we want to convert it now to mixed use and residential.
Yeah, that's happening all over, particularly the South Side. You've seen that, and you put your finger right on sort of where the conflict arises. So the area or the whole character of an area changes, and as a result of that, what may have previously been very mixed, it could have been commercial, industrial, residential, might now become more residential in character. When that happens, the planners have to address that and have to have zoning changes. That is, either the policy has to change to redirect or focus on the way that the character of the neighborhood, sort of the trajectory of the changes are, or particular zoning applications where persons who might be either entering into that neighborhood or who are currently there make application for changes on the particular property they have. And that's where you actually have individual decision making using the current zoning code. And that can be one of the problems that people have. So that's how the government regulates it.
And there's another side to it. Before I do, callers, if you have questions about these zoning issues that are occurring in Chattanooga, the Airbnb, or if you not just the Airbnb issues, but if you want to get into some of the redevelopment that's occurring maybe in your neighborhood or around your properties, feel free to call us. We're here at Nooga Radio. The number here is 423-800-8949. That's 423-800-8949. We'll do our best to try to address what you're concerned about. And I'm sure those are concerns that aren't shared just by you, but by others listening. And so, it'd be a good, almost like a town hall, a forum to be able to discuss some of these issues.
That's the way to say it, Jim.
But now there's another side, and that's what I was getting to, is when you change the nature or character of an area of Chattanooga, you change the infrastructure needs. Suddenly, you may have had a old 2-lane road that ran into a plant that was used by its trucks and by its employees, and that was it. And suddenly you change this area to where you've got multifamilies and multi-use, and suddenly that road is no longer sufficient for the travel that's going to be occurring there. You've got families that are getting kids out in the mornings going to school. You've got a lot of people going to work. You've got stores opening up and shoppers and restaurants and stuff. And so you've changed the infrastructure requirements for that neighborhood to make it worthwhile. Well, that places a bigger burden on the government, because the government has the obligation to provide that infrastructure and use its tax dollars. So suddenly we've got a burden and no way to meet it unless we change values and raise additional tax dollars to do that.
That's true, Jim. And particularly in a state where we rely on property taxes as the primary generator revenue, that's a difficult way to try to plan for the future. Although, if anyone's been involved in these processes, you understand that, just like you said, when you start changing zoning and you start looking at the way that it interacts with other governmental functions, then it becomes a very complicated, and sometimes it is an area that involves not only the state of Tennessee, but Georgia and Alabama as well. I don't know if many people realize this, but when we start talking about changing roadways, you ultimately end up in doing what's called regional plannings. Our regional planning have interactions with other governmental entities from other states, because it's important to be able to plan the overflow or the use of, particularly, let's say, in transportation. That's where we typically see it. that those committees will get together, they'll meet, they'll have decisions, they'll look for funding, and that becomes an issue where you try to find either state or federal funding to be able to meet the needs of transportation improvements.
Exactly. And so, there's a balancing not only between property owners like the chicken plant and the residents that's near, and you mentioned that. And we've got to balance, the burdens and benefits to the two people who both own the property and have a right to use their property, but that right is not unfettered.
Well, that's true, Jim.
But you've also got the balancing now between the government, who's got to fund the projects to service those properties, and the property owner and their needs and desires.
Yeah, and that becomes an economic analysis that needs to be made to see, because there's a number of factors that go into whether or not zoning should be approved. And those individual decisions typically relate to the planning and to the overall impact that it may have economically in a particular area. And one of the areas, in our practice, when we're working at McCoon, Williams, Ashley, and Stanley, and if you want to talk to us about these things, we'd be pleased to do it. Our number 756-6400. We can talk about any particular zoning things that may relate to your property. But when we're dealing with those things, and I think in my practice, I've certainly had some involvement with the latest planning that's been involved for Lincoln Park, Erlanger, and the Central Avenue Amnicola connector.
Right.
And that's a great example of the amount of planning that's been going on now several years, of the impact on a particular neighborhood by a large institution. So Hamilton County, Erlanger being a quasi-governmental entity, and the impact between the state of Tennessee and the state of Georgia. Many people don't realize that Central Avenue actually impacts or connects with the state of Georgia, and that there have been some indications that other planning needs to be done with regards to infrastructure on transportation. And so there have been a number of meetings about that. There have been a number of meetings about how particularly commercial traffic is going to use that thoroughfare and how it impacts upon a number of neighborhoods in and around Erlanger.
Yep, that's true. And, in Lincoln Park, and somewhere in the past month, I saw an article on Lincoln Park and read it, and I did not realize the history of that area.
Well, it's a historical area. Yeah, and if you've looked at it, I recommend all Chattanoogans become familiar with that. Very interesting that relates to the African-American community here in Chattanooga, about the development over time of that particular area, and how that was sort of the jewel of the African-American community in Chattanooga. Very important historical piece of real estate.
Yeah, and I'm a baseball fan. I live, eat, and sleep baseball, and to find out that the players that went through there in the old Negro League that existed, and the games and the people that were there, and sounding to me that we're about to lose or potentially lose part of that history by this development that's occurring. And so there's a balancing, are we going to try to just preserve these areas because of what happened there is almost a monument to what occurred, because it's not occurring anymore? Or are we going to look at the financial needs and the economic needs of this community to grow, and to the homeowners around there who will benefit by having their properties possibly sold at some point in time for a much higher value because of the redevelopment that's going to occur there? And it's a real tough issue. It
is tough. That's tough for planners. It's certainly something that property owners have paid a lot of attention to. Been to a number of meetings on that particular neighborhood myself. Very interesting to see community activity and community activists get together to try to preserve what certainly is history. Now, we don't necessarily need museums in our, more museums in our community that relate to those kinds of things, but it's an important thing not to forget that this land, particularly what you mentioned, the Negro Southern League, that these were people who become very well known, very famous. So, for instance, I know that the baseball player Satchel Paige played at that field. That field down there has some significance by itself. Right across the street's Ingalls Stadium. Certainly a great historical stadium, but you don't see the remnants of that neighborhood don't show the history. And so it requires neighborhood representatives to be able to keep that alive, to inform the rest of us, and for us to also work together with the neighborhood like Lincoln Park to make sure that it's preserved. And I don't know if you realize this, but Lincoln Park at one point in time, had a large swimming pool, sort of like Warner Park does now. That was black only at that time. There was a Ferris wheel. There were a number of other attractions there. It was really the center of a community. And although it is not the same way as it is now, if you go down there and look, you can see the remnants of that. But it's not that sort of community as it used to be. But let's not forget it. It's still an important thing, and the people don't forget it. They're the great representatives in that neighborhood, good people, and it's been a pleasure to work with them and to hear them in regards to that particular zoning fight they're involved in.
Well, just if you could maybe let the listeners know, where are we now with those plans and what's going on?
Well, from the last time I checked, I haven't been to a meeting now in probably the last 6 months or maybe 9 months. The last time I heard, the city had made a proposal. There were government funds that had been taken that were supposed to be directed toward planning. There's been a NEPA study that's been done that indicated the impact in that area. Not only, and I don't know if people know this either, not only is that area important to the African American community, but the whole area down through what used to be called Citico. That's the Citico area. I believe that there had been some indications that there were Native American burial sites there in that area.
There used to be Indian mounds down there.
There are still Indian mounds down there. If you look on old maps, I did take that into consideration, the NEPA study, and that's part of an environmental study that has to be done in order to be able to take further steps in building the roads. Right now, they haven't gone any farther than that, from what I understand. But it's an important thing to continue to remember.
Clay, I think we've got a call.
Sure.
Hello, caller. Yes, caller.
Well, listening to you talk about zoning, the one thing that I think about is I live down in St. Elmo, which is a historic zoning district. And the Historic Zoning Board has ultimate control over almost every aspect of what you can do to your property. I know that it's important for you to maintain the character of a neighborhood, kind of like Morningside or Eveningside, where all those homes were built in the same time era and have a concerted theme going on. But St. Elmo has houses from the 1800s all the way up to this year. There is no theme. It's just we have a few old houses there, and because of that, the Historic Zoning Board is going to tell you what you can and cannot do to your house.
Well, caller, that's exactly right. You know, one of the problems that people run into when they move into an area that has a historic zone is that there is a great deal of control over that. Now, you have to continue to remember that whether it's St. Elmo or the Morningside, Ferger Place, Battery Place, or Fort Wood, those are all historic zones. I think Missionary Ridge as well. But bottom line on it is that is a process that the neighborhood went through. And for instance, most of these were set up or have go back into the last century in the 70s and 80s when historic zones were set up. That was an application process that was made. The city decided to use that as a special use. There is of course, as you know, being a resident in the neighborhood, there are specific historic zoning codes that relate to that area and to no other area in the city. And the board has, as you said, their own group that monitors and makes sure any applications for the particular modification of a property is controlled. Now, some would say that's too much control. Others would say that's an important thing for us not to forget it. That is really where government comes to bear locally with property owners. It's difficult, but I think it's necessary.
The one thing you got to look at though is that back here in St. Elmo, because I've lived here for a number of years, and when that process was first done here, you had a minuscule number of people that even knew it was going on, that this was even being forwarded. The vast majority of people in St. Elmo had no clue it was being done until it was done. And even at that, the new homes coming in, I've got a home 2 doors down from me. They're talking right now about putting 27 homes south end of Tennessee and 55th Street. 27 new homes.
Well, caller, here's what I would tell you.
There's not anything being said about them having to adhere to a certain look or anything like that. They get a free pass.
Well, here's what the county says, caller. So if you take a look at it, the county's very sure. Go ahead, caller. Sorry, we were talking over each other.
Oh, I'm sorry. But, that's what I'm saying, though, is, these newer homes that are being built here, they get a free pass. They can pretty much do what they want to do. But yet my home, I have to beg them on what color I can paint it.
I understand, caller. And, when you start talking to the planning agency, particularly with regards to historic zoning, those cases, so this ends up coming before particular cases. Those cases that deal with homes that do have historical character have to comply. One of the things that the Historical Zoning Commission wants to do is that projects that are not historical in character, even if you make additions to your home that are not historical in character, they want to make sure that it looks like it's not historical, that it looks like an addition, that it's not something that's been added on to try to mimic the history. And so that's an important consideration. And whether that's true or not, good or not, that's debatable, but that has been the position of the Historic Zoning Commission.
Well, the problem with the Historic Zoning Commission is the vast majority of people on it are unqualified. I mean, they're just people that their city commissioner put up for the position. They have no background in construction, no background in history. They're just common people that are telling me what I can do with my house.
Well, caller, here's what I say. I also live in a historic zone, and if you want to make a change in that, you need to get involved. That's exactly where the rubber meets the road. The other thing you mentioned a moment ago is that many of the people that were involved in historic zoning were proceeding without the community at large being aware of it. That is a problem that the city has, or their sort of mechanism that they use in regards to the involvement for areas that are special use zones is that they require neighborhood associations to be the voice of that neighborhood. That's not always the case. The problem ends up being that neighborhood occupants don't always get notice of the proceedings. The neighborhood I live in, that's been a problem. It continues to be a problem. Necessarily listen only to the neighborhood associations because they don't always represent everyone.
Well, back in the 90s, I was actually president of the St. Elmo Improvement League for a couple of years. And at that time, that's when the elementary school down here was closed, and they were trying to figure out what to do with it. And I found out as the president, the city did not tell me, I found out on my own that they had a special committee that didn't have anybody I knew on it that was making recommendations on what to do with the school. And they were claiming to be the neighborhood organization, and they weren't.
Yeah.
So, yeah, even when you've got neighborhood organizations, you have to wonder how tied to the neighborhood is the organization.
Well, caller, we're coming up on a break. We certainly do appreciate your call. It's a timely call. It's certainly an important issue. You're welcome to talk about these issues at another time with us. We're going to be talking about Tennessee Residential Real Estate Disclosure Act in the second half. If you still want to talk about issues related to zoning, please give us a call. We certainly talk to you about that some more, but we've got to take a break now. This is Nooga Radio, 800-8949. Appreciate the caller. Thanks again.
Yes, thank you all. And as we're finishing up, we'll be coming back after the half hour. And as Clay indicated, we'll be changing somewhat the topic, talking more about some of that, but still the issues that deal with your property. Thank you.
The Tennessee Valley's news, talk, and sports leader. Nooga Radio, AM 1240 and 92.7 FM.
3, 2, 1.
Chattanooga Radio, AM 1240 and 92.7 FM's news now.
New details about a motorcycle crash on Highway 134. Hamilton County Sheriff's Office deputies say that a motorcyclist was trying to negotiate a left-hand turn when he overcorrected and went off the edge of an embankment, and he was killed in that crash. The name of the victim still not released. In Ray County, the jail population has been cut in half, but the sheriff says the jail is still overcrowded. The state has mandated the overcrowding situation be fixed by August. The county commission is scrambling to track down contractors to build a new jail. The commission hopes the new jail would house 280 to 300 inmates. The current jail is rated for 87 and has 115. In Hamilton County, the school board has approved a 4-year contract for Dr. Brian Johnson to be the superintendent of schools. His pay has been tabbed at $197,500 with bonuses up to $7,500 if certain conditions are met. Russell Stroud, Nooga Radio News, now.
In-depth traffic, news, and information. Mornings on Nooga Radio, AM 1240 and 92.7 FM.
Expect some sunshine, hot and humid weather out there for your afternoon. Highs into the lower 90s. A spotty shower storm may pop up mainly to the mountains tonight. Muggy lows, lower 70s. For Thursday, a few more widely scattered afternoon showers and storms. 90 to 92, a little more likely again Friday. Check out Taco Bell's new Double Chalupa, now in a $5 box with a Doritos Locos taco and a medium drink, but it won't be around forever, so love it while it lasts, now at Taco Bell. And I'm Sports 12 Chief Meteorologist Patrick Orr on Nooga Radio AM 1240 and 92.7 FM.
The Tennessee Valley's news, talk, and sports leader. Nooga Radio, AM 1240 and 92.7 FM.
McCune, Williams & Ashley PLLC offers a full array of legal services to meet the needs of businesses and individuals. Our attorneys represent diverse backgrounds, interests, and legal emphasis, but we share one common goal, providing the highest quality legal services to our clients through the combination of our talents, experience, and expertise. In each case, we strive to tailor those services to meet each client's specific circumstances. Business law, business organization, civil litigation, commercial litigation, conservatorship and guardian law, bankruptcy law, just to name a few. With over 188 years of combined experience, McCune Williams Ashley PLLC is here to help you and your business succeed. MWALawfirm.com. That's MWALawfirm.com. Call 423-756-6400. That's 423-756-6400.
With Keller Williams Realty. I am a realtor in Chattanooga. We list and sell homes, work with buyers, work with home sellers. I have been involved in real estate for over 10 years. My background is as a real estate investor. That is what I bring to the table, is that real estate investor mindset. My job is to help you sell your house for the most money, employing the best marketing strategy and walking you through what can be a rather stressful process. So we are encouraging people who are on the fence or even thought about selling their house to give us a call. There's no obligation. We're just here to kind of have a conversation, let people know what the process is like, what the market is like, what values they can expect to receive. We work with buyers as well. I also have a buyer's agent that works exclusively with my buyers because we want to give our clients as much attention as we can. My cell phone number is 423-364-0028. Our website is northriverpropertygroup.com. That's northriverpropertygroup.com. We'd love for you guys to call us.
I have the best steak selection in town. The name of the business is Don's Meat Shop, and I'm Donnie Raines. Just ask for Donnie. I make over 20 different types of sausages. Most of them are great for grilling. We have the best selection, best quality. We have the hard-to-find items. Don's Meat Shop.
Nooga Radio, AM 1240 and 92.7 FM knows your opinion is important. So call 800-8949. Agree or disagree? Call 423-800-8949. 800-8949. Nooga Radio, AM 1240, 92.7 FM, and 95.3 HD4. News, talk, sports. Nooga Radio. The Tennessee Valley's news, talk, and sports leader. Nooga Radio, AM 1240 and 92.7 FM.
Welcome back, Chattanooga, to Legal Bytes. This will be the second half of our hour of discussion. And we have Clay Whitaker here with us, co-host on the show today. And I guess in the first half hour, we were discussing issues and the balances that have to be addressed. And we had a caller that was discussing the Historical Zoning Commission and how much control it has, and it actually does have, over the properties that are within its zone. And you suggested to the caller that one of the ways to try to address those concerns is to get involved. And how does that happen, Clay?
Well, we had talked about a little bit while the break was on. I think this caller certainly had been experienced and practiced living in one of those neighborhoods for any length of time, and you'll come up with a lot of this information. But he mentioned that you need to talk with the commissioner. I think that's true. There has to be a vacancy on the board. You certainly put your name in to be part of the board. make an application and you get voted onto that board and by appointment. And so that's typically the way you can get involved in historical zoning. There are other ways, though, other things you can do. You can certainly get involved with your neighborhood. I mentioned that the city has taken the position, and I know this because I've been involved in a number of issues related to particular zoning proposals, particularly the changes in areas that are historically zoned. And that,
as you said, you live in
I do live
area.
in one. Yeah. You know, one of the things that we didn't talk about in the first half is the change in Chattanooga from particular use categories to a form-based zoning plan, which we have now. That's the sort of thing that last several years, there's been a movement in form-based zoning, and that is essentially using the kind of building as the basis for making a zoning decision, as opposed to what typically may have been used, and that is definitions in the zoning code for kinds of uses like residential, commercial, industrial.
All right, hold on a second. I think we've got a call, Clay.
Sure.
Hello, caller. You have a question?
Hello, I do. I was listening to the last caller that called in, and could really hear the frustration he had with what he perceived as decisions from the Historic Zoning Commission. And I was wondering if there was any way that a homeowner or property owner could appeal a decision from the Historic Zoning Commission.
Yeah, thanks, caller. So yes, there is a way that can be done. There is an appeal process that the county has, and ultimately it ends up in a lawsuit if you believe that the grounds exist for that. So typically what happens when you end up with a zoning decision, you're going to start out was the historic zoning is a great example, because you have decisions that are made by the Historic Zoning Commission. Those can go for full approval before the county. And then finally, if you don't like that, you can go ahead and go with a lawsuit. Typically that suit's going to be filed in Chancery Court, and you're going to challenge it based upon a number of issues. And I think last time we sort of discussed these things, but we didn't get into it in great detail. You've got questions that might relate to whether or not the zoning is unconstitutional. That particular regulation might be unconstitutional as a taking. So when we say a taking, in the United States Constitution and the Tennessee Constitution, you can have a taking. That is to deprive the property owner of the ability to use that property based upon a restrictive zoning regulation or decision. So it can be either the policy itself, or it can be the actual application of that policy on your zoning request. And if it's a taking, you may have redress with the court. That can also be something that is a deprivation of a constitutional right, such as a substantive deprivation of due process or procedural deprivation of due process. Procedure basically being you didn't get notice and you didn't get proper hearing. So if you, those are typically going to result in the process being where you didn't know that a certain zoning policy or regulation that applied to your case or to your property was taking effect. You might be able to sue on that. Substantively, it might not, you might receive a due process deprivation based upon whether or not that particular policy or application of the policy to your property may result in the lack of, or the inability for the government to enunciate a substantial governmental interest for the policy. So if it doesn't have one, the arguments typically is that the policy itself becomes arbitrary and capricious.
Or unconstitutionally vague.
Or unconstitutionally vague, either one of those.
Right.
And so if you appealed that decision to the court, would the judge substitute his or her discretion for the commission, or would they give deference to the commission's decision?
Well, we're going to look at those, the particular issue. So whatever the allegation that you make about the reason why that decision was inappropriate, whether it's procedural due process or constitutionally void for vagueness or unconstitutional as a taking, either of those allegations may be the basis that the court might use to overturn the decision. And so it's not necessarily one or the other. You may make an allegation that has to be supported factually based on what's actually happened.
Right. I think, but if you're saying, well, wait a minute, this color of chartreuse that I'm required to use is not appropriate, it should be royal blue. I think at that point in time, the question is the chancellor going to get deference to what the community is saying through the historical board.
So if it's a historical issue like Jim's mentioning or the previous caller had mentioned, those issues relate to planning. So you have essentially you're going to have experts in the field of historical building codes, building appearances, architecture, and those decisions typically that you'll find in our local historic zoning regulations are based upon what an expert has found to be prevalent in that community. So if there is a particular architectural style or a particular type of paint or color, then those are the things that have to be testified to. You have to have expert support. There can be other issues not related to historical zoning that also require expert historical or particular types of expertise in architecture that need to be supported. And these particular zoning issues may relate to other issues like mentioned earlier, health, traffic, infrastructure. Experts in fields like engineering or health and human services might be able to testify about that support your case.
Caller, do you live in a historical zone?
I do. I also live in St. Elmo, and there's a lot of folks in our neighborhood who frequently complain about the Historic Planning Commission and that they've proposed making improvements to their property which have not been approved. And I've often wondered if they had any redress to the court in order to try to get that opinion or decision changed.
Well, and there are ways, but the thing is about our particular historic zoning. So I also reside, as I've mentioned before, in historic zone. I found that the best way, let's say that you propose having an addition to your home. Well, we want to change out. The typical thing might be, hey, my old home has some terrible old windows, single pane. The sashes are not very well sealed. I'm losing my energy through the house. So I want to put in a more modern type window. Well, there's restrictions on that. You usually have to have wooden windows that are framed. You can certainly have any kind of glass. I don't think there are restrictions on the glass, but you can't have things that are clad in vinyl or clad in aluminum. Those things are typical that you'd find in a modern home, and there are reasons for them. Those materials were not historical. As a result of that, you're restricted on the use. However, you can have what's called a variance. And the variance might approve that, but you have to be able to work with the Historic Zoning Commission and to present your argument about why that's required. My recommendation is you need to hire counsel who certainly is able to handle that. We're a good firm for that purpose, McCoon, Williams, Ashley, and Stanley. We would go and use the resources that we would have, that is to retain someone that has expertise in the field and to explain to the commission why it is that a particular clad window might be the better choice as a modern material, certainly more economical, and you would never know that it wasn't appropriate for that neighborhood. You might get your variance.
Next time I hear somebody complaining about that process, I'm certainly going to pass on that information.
All right. Thank you so much, caller.
Thank you.
And one of the things, Jim, that people don't really realize, and it's the process. So it's like anything else. You have to understand what the goal is, what the purposes of historic zoning is, or we spend a lot of time talking about that particular zoning, but it could be something as that you'll typically find in some of the other areas we've talked about. You're in an industrial area, it's turning into something differently. The area we're talking about, the south side, certainly is having that happen. There may be other things that you can do, but you have to hire experts to be able to present your argument and to factually base it. The fact that you might want it and that you may make an allegation or you might make statements of fact that might support your particular request for a particular type of zoning or zoning change might not necessarily carry the day. But if you have an appropriate expert in the field of engineering, let's say an example, there's a concern about the way that the water might flow off your property onto your neighbor's property, or you may overburden the street with traffic. You might have to hire a traffic engineer and present your argument, and it factually supports it. That's what you need to do to get the zoning changed and the proposals that you have for the Planning Commission.
Sure. And I mean, it's part of being in a community. I mean, for example, I live in a neighborhood where we have a homeowners association, and we have an architectural review committee that serves basically the same kind of function that the historical commission does in trying to control modifications or changes with respect to what's occurring in the neighborhood, because the neighborhood was built with certain expectations. You're supposed to have so much set off the road. At least 3 sides of the house has to be brick. There has to be certain square footage, that all these things that are occurring. And that's what we live in. It's because when the community was developed, that we were going to develop it in a certain way, so that it was planned, and that so all of our home values would not be adversely affected by something different, a duplex going up in the corner or whatever. So, that's exactly what this commission's doing, is it's trying to preserve the character and nature of these historical zones, to make sure that the homes that are in there and the people that go in have bought in there to have a historical home, and to preserve it value and lose that character because the house across the street has something totally different put on it.
That's true, Jim. So we sort of got strayed off of our topic being the Airbnb, but all of these things relate to that topic. And so one of the things I think we're going to get to today, and I think we probably need to touch on real quickly since we didn't get to finish it out. What is special use permit? Well, special use permit simply means that the area where the proposed use is ordinarily wouldn't support the type of use that's being requested. So as a compromise with the people who are currently unregulated and using Airbnb, you might have neighbors that are complaining, hey, you know what? You're bringing transients into our neighborhood. We don't know who these people are. There's a safety concern. That might be one. Second thing might be you're overburdening the neighborhood with parking. We're in the neighborhood. They're taking up street parking. I can't park as a result of that. So you might be burdening the resources of the neighborhood by using your Airbnb. And finally, you may create a further issue that is that folks that are coming in at odd hours, that they're invading the home or coming into a home, and the neighbors may look at it and say, well, I don't recognize that car. I'm concerned about these, my neighbor's home being broken into. We don't realize that the home is being used as an Airbnb. There can be some other issues, but those are the things that are coming to mind. Certainly common concerns that neighborhoods may have. And so you hear a lot of folks, and I think last time we were talking about this, we had some calls that came in, and people were saying, well, I ought to be able to use my property that way I want to. I'm paying the mortgage on it. Being able to rent it out helps me out, helps the economy out, helps us to be able to provide services for temporary lodging for people. And let's say that I've got a property that currently was zoned R4. Let's say that it's out in the county, out in the city someplace where R4 still is an appropriate zone. And that zone would allow for, let's say, lodging homes or for temporary housing. There's a description in the R4 that says, that you can have that kind of use of your property. But it might not necessarily describe the kind of use as a hotel, as is essentially what this is some sort of, not a lodging house, but like a temporary hotel use. That is what the special use is for. So the city would be able to regulate people's usage based upon the application they would make, getting that permit, saying, I expect my usage to be X, and that we're going to, have this kind of thing. It would give the neighborhood the opportunity to come in and participate. If your neighbor's making application for the permit, everybody gets due process. You get notice and a hearing, and they get to ask questions about what it is your use is and why it is you think it's appropriate in that neighborhood.
Exactly. And, and that way the commission can then make a decision on whether or not to grant the permit or not, or the council and make the decision. Is this going to adversely affect safety? We just had GPS, and some of the private schools raised issues about having Airbnb in their areas within so many 100 feet because of concerns for safety of the girls at GPS.
Sure.
And the lights of the rest. So,
well, and that's the sort of thing that people are concerned with. For instance, what if you had someone who was on the sex offender registry that came to stay at your Airbnb? You didn't know it. They didn't advise you of it.
Well, you're not asking about it.
And you're not going to ask about that. And so let's say they stay a couple of days and they're right next door to people who might ordinarily be concerned about that type of person staying you're in a residence where they ordinarily would not be allowed to stay. Let's say there were children in the neighborhood, or you're near a school, GPS, or some other restriction on that particular type of person. That would be a problem. The city would need to know that sort of thing. That may not be something that's actually regulated in the permit. I don't know. people have to understand is that the process isn't just about freedom to use your property the way you want to. It's about allowing communities to work together to try to have property use that conforms to what the neighbors believe is appropriate for the area where they live at, because their property, like you said already, their property values are important. Their safety is important. And if you're going to run a hotel in a neighborhood, you want to know that.
Right. And on top of that, as you mentioned, street parking, the burden on the that neighborhood will be altered. I mean, if everyone on the street had an Airbnb and you only had parking for one car and they were coming in with 2 or 3 cars because they were staying there wouldn't be inadequate parking.
Right. You know, and some of the arguments are this, what's the difference between an Airbnb and a bed and breakfast? Well, there may not be a substantial difference. I think the issue primarily is technology, but even today, with online reservation systems, bed and breakfasts are, that was sort of the movement that had occurred back the last, say, 20 years. A lot of people were using bed and breakfast and developing their property and using it for that purpose. A little different, because the way I understand most of the time it works is that you may be renting out a single room in your home where you reside. Now, bed and breakfasts don't always work that way. They may be more like a lodging house that rent out more than one room. And even in that sort of circumstances, the city has the ability to regulate and do regulate the use of property in that fashion.
Right. I know, for example, we've gone up to see my son in college, and there's a professor that rents out the bottom of he and his wife's home to parents and the like that are coming in for university functions, because there's inadequate lodging in that small town for this university to allow for everyone to be able to get something comfortable and appropriate. Several professors and people within town that lease either a downstairs or the whole home during college functions, so there's adequate housing. So, I mean, you know, there's definitely a need for these types of things. There's a right as a property owner for these types of things. It has to be a balancing based upon the community issue.
Well, it's just like driving a car, Jim. You can own a car, but unless you have a license to operate it, you may not be able to drive it on our streets. Right. So,
and even with the license, there are rules within the use governing how you use the car.
There are. So it's not like we're unfamiliar with the process of a special use permit. It's very similar to having a driver's license. And of course, other things that might be required as a result of that, certainly in the purview of the county, providing certain insurance, requiring you to have a bond, that sort of thing you might need. Those are the kinds of things. Even inspections might be appropriate, because, as you know, the hotel industry is highly regulated and requires inspections. Those are the kinds of things that may affect health and welfare of the community. And so I don't have a problem with the idea that there's a special use permit, as long as it's adequately administered, that there's equal protection under the law, due process for the neighborhood and for the persons making application, and that there's a strong, substantial governmental interest to each and every one of the regulations placed on the people wanting to use Airbnb.
Say that 3 more times.
I'm not sure that I could, Jim. I think it came out pretty good the first time.
Those are all adequate issues, reasonable issues, I think, for anyone looking at these zoning issues, and especially with respect to now the zones that have been set up for Airbnb, is to make sure that there is a governmental interest. Make sure that there are procedural, both substantive and procedural due process protections in place before they take action and the like. So I think those are all the issues that go to how our government balances individual rights to community rights and tries to find something that's fair and equitable. Again, this is Legal Bytes. This is Nooga Radio. If you have a call, it's 423-800-8949. And we'll be happy to take your call and continue discussing. We've been continually intending to get over to some of the issues regarding Tennessee's Disclosure Act.
I think that's going to be next time, Jim.
I think it's going to be next time. I agree with you. Again, this is Jim McCoon, Clay Whitaker with Legal Bytes, your weekly law forum to discuss issues in our community that affect you and your business. We'll talk to you again next Wednesday at 11 o'clock. And I appreciate each and every one of you for joining and listening in with us.